Thank you. Yes.
Very nice presentation. Thank you very much. I noticed that for the Isaac book, the cover of the book has the initials as JJ, not I.
Oh, it's supposed to be IJ. That's
Okay.
an IJ. That should be.
Oh.
Yeah, Isaac J. Hill.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, interesting thing. Let me tell you about Isaac J. Hill. What happened to him? He preached all in South Jersey, and then he had gotten a point to where he was going to be confirmed as a minister in the AME church, and I'm not getting all of that exactly how it's supposed to be referenced, but he was it was his ordinational sermon. He was giving it in Millville. And while he was giving it, he had a stroke, and he was paralyzed. They brought him home to Woodbury, and several months later he passed away. Yes.
The records of the census that you start out with, did you get those online or did you go to?
Straight out of Ancestry.com.
Okay, all right.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. A lot of this stuff is online, of course, as we all know now. But you know, I visited. You know, I went up to Trenton, looked at some state archives, you know, physically, but 80% of it I got online.
Can you talk a little bit about what you know about the role of women, their participation, black women, I mean, during this period?
Absolutely. Yes. My research is really centered around what's going on with families. And when we look at families, we look at Mother Dickerson, as they called her, for example. By 1850, she's already like 60 years old. She's about 60 years old already in 18. So she's a leader when she gets here by force of her age and experience and her influence. And her and her husband were certainly major players in the civil rights movement as well as the church movement. So she's strong there, and not only that, we have the stories that we can tell. There's 1861. There's a woman by the name of Fleta in Boston who writes this idea of what do women, she's answering a question, what do women know about war? What do they know about war? I have that here, but Fleta breaks it down to the point of making it known that every time a soldier dies, women feel that. Every time a soldier's wounded, they feel that. When the soldiers leave, they feel that. When the children are asking for food, in particular African American children who are like starving here on the home front in many respects, they feel that. And ultimately, so Fleta says, what do women not know about war? And along with that, we can look at the experience right here of the Fennemans, for example. We have Aaron and, excuse me for getting her first name, Aaron and Rebecca Fenneman. Aaron and Rebecca Fenneman. They're buried right there in Swedesboro behind the AME church there. Rebecca's husband went off to war, and he got ill and he died. And he was 40-some years old when he went to war. In one of the few instances, she brings his body home, and they are buried there side by side today in Swedesboro. But the thing is, she was 94 years old when she died. You see, and had lived in Camden. By that time, Woodbury, you see, and 94 years later, you know, that's where she is today, the Fennemans. So I had talked to one of the Fenneman descendants too. It's interesting, you know, to see that these folks are still around, and some of them don't even know that about their rich past. We could talk about the girlfriend of Henry Haynes of Pittsgrove, who took a bullet in the groin in Olustee. He goes through prisoner of war camp. Anyway, he comes out, he fathers 9 children. He and his wife. But I had told you earlier about this woman out of Burlington. Her last name was Henson. And she wrote a letter to Lincoln about all of the pain, economic pain that she was suffering. And you could see her during the war and after the war taking care of her husband who had been wounded, because these guys came home, they couldn't earn a living too well. During this time, certainly the work involved manual labor. The idea of just working with one arm was not really, going to be helping things too much. So she opened a store in Burlington. She became the breadwinner in the family, much like one of these women who then had to just keep the family together by their own labor because the men had been wounded, even if not physically, mentally. And if not mentally, they could have been strung out on some of the drugs that they were using at that time, the morphine and things that, folk weren't even clear on how that operated. And so the war fell on the women's backs, even in normal circumstances of war where we could say they had to help each other's when somebody's husband or family member got killed, they had to help each other. So they became a sisterhood in many ways, and that crossed racial lines in many ways too. You see, that these folks, these women would console each other, help each other, make it through the war. So the war, as Flea says, what do women not know about war? There's more act.
Did the black regiments have the camp followers, such as the white regiment, where the women went with them?
Yeah. Well, most camps had followers of a sort. That's just part of the nature of war
At the time,
in the military at the time. But any significant... Now, you look at Camp William Penn, which was the largest camp in the North. In fact, we have Mr. Joe Beckton here, who is the prime mover of the 3rd Regiment reenactors, sitting here. But Camp William Penn, 11 regiments were trained there during the Civil War right outside of Philadelphia. And it's during that period we get a good insight, too, of how they felt about women. You see, there were civilian supervisors of Camp William Penn. And their views of women who were visiting the camp were that these women were of low moral character. This is one instance where you find white officers and the black enlisted men all coming together, standing together to defend the character, the dignity of their women. Well, not the white women, they weren't of an issue, but the black women, the character and the dignity of the black women who were visiting the camps. These are our families, these are our mothers, our wives, our children. That's who's coming to visit, and because they didn't want any women going into any of the tents, and it became this order. And so this is one time where, and I think it was the 25th Regiment that was in camp at that time, stood up in mass and said, no, you're not going to do that to these black women. You're not going to do that to our women, and give them that kind of label, and we will not stand for them not visiting us, you see. And so that's the kind of thing you had. So you had stereotypical challenges coming in. You were living in at that time. It's the what do you call it? The Victorian age, and this whole idea about what women's roles should be. From one sector of society, certainly clashed with others.
Speaking about William Penn, when I was over at the Gloucester County Historical Society and looking through the records there, and one of the things, when you speak of women and also the men too, or how courageous the women were, it was really alarming to me to see how many people died at the camp.
Oh, wow, that's a fantastic kind of situation to just witness.
So
The
mostly
measles
disease?
epidemics,
Yeah.
like measles
Yeah.
too. That's like measles wiping out people on a daily basis. At one point, again with the 25th Regiment in particular, and a lot of those people were from New Jersey. Oh, it's something like the early part of 1864. It was just a devastating kind of situation taking place there. People were dying in the I want to say the bunkhouse. That's cowboy stories, but dying in the barracks. And in one instance, the body stayed there for like 2 days. You know, so the men were all, "Look, get this body out of here," you know, and all this kind of thing. So it was a rough stop. I'm looking at 100 enslaved people who came up out of Delaware almost as a group. And in that group, I'm looking at all these young 17, 18-year-old kids. The Redden brothers, they're dead in about a minute. They're buried over there in Philly. They buried them at cemetery. What cemetery is that? Lebanon, yeah, Lebanon. Right, buried them at Lebanon. And we have the number and everything, where their graves were and everything. But, I mean, these guys were, the thing is, I think they were sick. They were dying of tuberculosis. There was a TB outbreak there, but their TB was carried in there. Some of these slave masters out of Delaware were selling sick people, well, selling, but they were encouraging their sick enslaved people to join the army so they could get that $300 compensation, you see. And then these guys were dying before 2 months was up, you know. So, absolutely.
I kind of remember reading somewhere that a heck of a lot of people during the Civil War died because of the food that they were getting was tainted in the cans. And there were a lot of deaths as a result of that.
Canned foods is coming out at that time. Canned foods coming out right around the Crimean War, 1850s. This is the first time we find canned foods being used in war, during the Crimean War. All right, over in Europe. Well, not really Europe. I guess that's Asia, right? Right near Europe.
Well, whatever Europe is. But it's not good. It's not good.
Yeah. Where that last suicide bombing just happened, right? Yes. So that certainly be the instance. We didn't know it certainly at that time about microscopic diseases. You know, that was just coming into the knowledge base of folks. You know, and but that was not most of the death was from disease and sickness. In terms of those who didn't get killed. And certainly there's instances of that. In fact, still going on, right?
Yeah.
Chipotle, I guess, tell us that one. Yes, Kurt. And then Ms. Holmes.
Could you expound on two ladies, I don't know their names right offhand. One being the lady that infiltrated the Confederate camps and reported back to the Union as a spy for the Union. And the other lady was the lady up at Valley Forge that gave medical aid to the troops on both sides.
In the Revolutionary War?
And
You said Valley Forge?
No, Valley Forge, I'm sorry.
Gettysburg.
Gettysburg.
Oh. I don't know. The first one, I forget their name. The second one, I don't know. All right.
Did you have come across anything where Reverend Hill was in any way contact with Richard Allen? Did they ever come together?
Well,
Almost at the same time.
I don't think so, because Richard Allen dies around 1830, 1831, right? Yeah. He's only born. He's a little kid at that time. Yeah, he's born like late 1820s something. So, yeah. So and no, he never met him. By the time he gets to Woodbury, or really comes into his own manhood, you know, Reverend Allen's dead.
Well, I have a few questions. What's the number of the GAR post here in Woodbury?
I forgot. It's on the tip of my tongue. I don't remember.
But you mentioned it was an integrated post, and that's
Yes,
a little
yes.
unusual by itself.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, William Walker. William Walker's executed for
Mutiny.
mutiny. Okay, so it's
Mutiny
basically
over the issue of
equal rights, equal pay.
equal pay. Equal pay. And so let's take that story too. So after he gets executed, there becomes a movement, a slow movement to get to right this wrong. And of course, the 54th, their famous protest, you know, takes place, and that kind of thing of not accepting any money. And so by the fall of 1864, Congress changes the law, and then they begin to get retroactive pay according to the rank, not color.
So, I fight over this all the time. So by November '64,
Right.
equal pay is kicking in.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so nobody.
Now they might not have gotten it yet.
Okay.
You know, the paymaster arrives kind of late sometimes, and so some of these people are getting their money, you know, in December or January and so forth like that.
So it'd be wrong to say that, you know, when they got to Texas, that they were just getting their equal pay. They had pockets full of money to have the celebration and the Jubilee. That would be wrong because they had their money for 6 months before that.
Well, yes, basically, yes. But I don't know about all the other stuff you're talking about. But yeah, you know, they certainly had their pay before that.
For some reason, I thought equal pay day was June 15th, 1865.
Oh, no, that's after the war.
Yeah. Exactly, that's after the war, yeah.
Were there any pension issues with the blacks like the whites? I know there were some, you know, problems.
Oh, sure. Listen, the pension issues with blacks and whites is a very interesting thing there going on, because in many instances, in order, and it's kind of a blessing. You know, sometimes when you watch people getting oppressed because then they want to put more records out about you. So what would happen is oftentimes when women or men would file for a pension, they would have to get investigated if the interviewer thought that there might be something shaky going on as far as like whether a person was married, had they been properly divorced, and those kinds of things. They were harder on African Americans. They turned down more African American applications than they did for white applicants. They investigated them more thoroughly, but investigating them more thoroughly, we began to get these rich records, because the pension records of the Civil War are some of the richest records that exist. I mean, you start reading about who's related to who, and who did what to who years ago, and who sold who. It is, you know, sometimes they are just absolutely spellbinding. Yes, Kurt?
Was this the reason why the records in St. Louis, the building burnt down?
Yes. Oh, you saying what? I'm not saying yes to the question. Which is
The reason was that many blacks was applying for pension.
Oh, you asking that's why?
And the
Is that why I
records-
get burned?
And the records, searching the records in St. Louis, the building burnt down, destroying the records.
Right. Now, that building that burned down in St. Louis, I think, destroyed like the World War II records.
No, this is Civil War.
I think the Civil War records got it burned in a fire in D.C.
Okay.
That fire in D.C. It was World War II records that got burned up in St. Louis.
Well, in D.C.
Right.
And actually, when you start looking town by town, you'll notice that around between 1880 and 1884, most of the city halls in the South caught on fire. So everybody who had their own land, you no longer had a record for your land. So when they came back with the New South, there were no records for your land. They just took your land just like that, person by person, all the way across. People often talk about appropriations, and there is room for appropriations that can be proved and documented.
Yes, indeed.
I got a problem. One more. I got the Walker. I got the Equal Pay Day. Equal Rights League. I'm very concerned that we had an Equal Rights League going into the Civil War, and we come out of the Civil War.
No, not going in. Coming out, we get it. In 1865, the New Jersey Equal Rights League is organized in Trenton, initiated by Southern New Jerseyans.
Oh, okay.
All right, they initiate that statewide convention,
Convention.
1865, at AME Church there.
Did we have one a little bit earlier in Harrisburg with William Day and those fellas?
Well, I'm just speaking about Jersey. So Pennsylvania's, they have their, there was a National Equal Rights League.
Yes, national.
The National Equal Rights League certainly had been called for in the previous year. I think at Syracuse in the Colored Convention, they called for it then. And so this was the culmination of that. And you see the different states beginning to form those statewide equal rights leagues. And they didn't really pan out and become a significant force as it is. So often, we get movements that don't necessarily accomplish what they start out to accomplish, but they're moving things along in the right direction. They're calling for petitions and those kinds of things. And in different states, there are different levels of success in regarding the campaign to get the vote.
Aren't they also clamoring for women's rights too?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So when we switch to civil rights, somebody gets lost, don't they?
Well, in 1865, that statewide convention for the Equal Rights League, see, they had one in 1849 also. 1849, they actually called for women to also have the right to vote. 1849, they didn't, but even the newspaper that reported on the 1865 convention noted the strong presence of women in that two-day convention. Their role, they said, was not necessarily to administer the thing, but their role in terms of running the thing was a different story. And so that's, the newspaper reported that, strong involvement of women. And certainly these conventions, I mean, they had to eat. People had to eat. And those cities, host cities, wanted to put their finest out there. So the women made it happen now, as they did then. And in my experience as a community organizer for a number of years, they do now. Yes, indeed.
Any connection between them and the suffragettes? I'm not up with the time period there.
Well, look, what's her name?
Alice Paul?
No, not Alice Paul. Talking about a black woman scholar. Why is her name escaping me? Anyway, she has this book.
Was there a parallel movement?
Yeah.
Or
Torberg Penn.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
I can't think of her first name. Morgan
Yes.
State.
Yes. Yes. I haven't picked that book up in a while. Anyway, so what we have. The point I'm trying to make is, look, African Americans get the right to vote in 1870. In that same year, we have a demonstration in Vineland, New Jersey, where women are having a mock vote. And she talks about this in this book, and it's Vineland, New Jersey, not only that, black women are participating in this. This is 1870, right in Vineland, and they have a mock vote for women. They're certainly on the cusp and in the thick of it right here in Jersey as well. Now, I'll tell you, there were only about 3 women out of about the 50 white women, but they were there, and it was an integrated situation. And certainly, when we look at struggle, at the beginning of struggle, and we see what it looks like, certainly we should be able to appreciate, the end results of that, the struggle that it took, those unrecognized kinds of activities, because that was certainly not a celebrated event. People were kind of scared by it. Men were, or at least white men were, bothered by it. That was the reason, in fact, that the whole idea of restricting the rights for African Americans and women had came by in the first place. In 1807, the election had done that whole thing where, following the election where some disgruntled whites had lost office, they began to organize and then campaign to restrict the vote to property white men. And then in 1844, they knocked that down and threw out the property, and so now you just had to be white, you see? And then we struggled with that all the way up until after 1870, because that didn't get taken out of off the books until 1877, and we had the right to vote in 1870. So 7 years, even after the vote, it was still in the books. You had to be white.
I heard a rumor that when New Jersey got started in '76, black men who owned property and women who owned property could vote.
Oh yes, yes, yes. No question. It was a property. It was a property qualification, and so that's why in 1807 it changed and was just restricted to white men with property. Absolutely.
That was actually imported from England, that property business, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. I guess
Right.
the whole shebang is,
Yeah.
is certainly set up along those lines. Yes. Well, look, it has been a wonderful pleasure being here with you tonight.
Oh, so where's the books? What you selling?
About 6 months.
Where's the video? Come on now.
You have a question?
Oh yes.
I'm a Woodbury resident, and this is Yusuf, and this is Sahar. Sahar's from Iran. She came here 4 years ago. Yusuf came here a year ago seeking asylum from Syria. They're both my dear friends. I wanted them to know, I brought them here tonight because I wanted them to understand more about the history of America and what America, what it is today. And of course the Civil War was a very important part of our history, and I wanted to introduce them to the Civil War and to American history, and they're from countries that are a lot worse off than ours right now. So,
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed. Welcome. Yes, indeed. Wow. Thank you. All righty. I'd like to get a picture. I'll do a selfie here.
You want me to take a picture?
I don't know.